In this video, I really want to talk about just a few tips when it comes to wintertime bass fishing. We are here in December, which means that the fall is really starting to wind down. We are really starting to get into the coldest weather that we will experience. Now, if you live in the north, that's a lot different than if you live down south. So keep that in mind when I'm talking about these. But I do know that growing up, there were just a few things that I always thought about wintertime bass fishing that the more that I have been fishing over the years, especially in the cold weather months, the more that I realize that some of those things that I believe were just untrue. They are just not true at all. So in this video, I just want to talk about a few key things when it comes to finding and catching bass in the winter. Now, before we get into it, this video is brought to you by Finn Fishing Apparel. And right now over at Finn Fishing, everything is at least 20% off. There are a few items that are over 30% off right now, including the duck hat, this waterproof, highly durable, lightweight hat. So today is the last day for a lot of these sales. I am going to continue to run some sales throughout December, but there's nothing that's going to be quite as good as 30% off the rest of the year, just so that you guys know. So I'm going to leave some links down below in the description. Also know that I am running a big contest from now until the very end of the year. So for every dollar spent over at Finn Fishing is an entry into this contest where I'm going to give away 10 different prizes, including some fishing reels, some glide baits, a over $2,000 Humminbird Solix 12 unit, and a fishing trip with myself. So big thanks to everybody who has shopped at Finn Fishing just over the last several years. It is truly the best way to help support this channel, and I greatly appreciate it. All right, let's talk a little bit about wintertime bass fishing. Now, one of the biggest things when it comes to bass fishing in the winter is that you do not necessarily have to be fishing super deep water. Like, I know that when I grew up, I always thought like the bass are going to be in the deepest water during this time of the year. And the truth is that bass tend to like to have a little bit of depth close by, but they don't necessarily always have to be around super deep water, even in some of the coldest fishing water that you will experience. And the reason that I phrase it like fishing water is that obviously if you're up and your lakes are frozen, it's different because you're going to be cutting holes in the ice. But the fishing water is really where you get a boat out there, or you're on the bank and you're casting. And what I've seen over the years is that you do not necessarily have to be fishing in deep water as long as you do have at least some decent depth close by. It does seem like bass like to have a little bit of depth close by, and it doesn't have to be like super, super deep, but they do like to have some depth close by. But I think that in the wintertime, when you have those sunny days, those calm sunny days, it will warm up that surface temperature where they actually prefer to be up in shallow water. You know, and I've had some really good days out there on the water over the years where I'm catching fish in 5, 6, 7, 8 foot of water, and the water temp's like 40, 41 degrees, 39 degrees. Like, I've had some really good days where the fish are not that deep, although they may be close to deep water, they're not that deep. Now, one of the biggest things that will keep them shallow is the presence of aquatic vegetation. Now, look, a lot of grass will die in really, really cold water, but sometimes it still leaves like some fragments. There's still like somewhat of like cover there that is underwater. And bass will relate to that. You know, if you ask the guys who live up in the northern part of the country, like at times they'll be ice fishing in like 6 foot of water, 5, 6, 3, 4 foot of water, like pretty shallow water, but they know that there's some grass in that area. And those fish, if you have grass, you have everything that a bass needs. Like, end of story, because grass is going to hold uh, a lot of bait fish, which obviously the bass are eating. It's just going to hold a lot of things. It gives them plenty of cover. If you have grass, it truly is a trump card. Now, it's not just grass. You can also have, you know, shallow wood, things like that, that will also hold bass. But grass is definitely a huge deal for me during the winter. Like, I always try to seek out grass. Now, personally, I seek out grass all the time because I just like to fish in grass. When you find bass in grass, you find some of the biggest populations that you will find throughout the year. But during the winter, absolutely try to figure out the grass bite if there is one on those lakes. Now, again, if there's not grass in your lakes, you may be able to still catch fish in fairly shallow water as long as it's in fairly with having deep water close by. You know, I fished the lake just a couple of years ago. It was about this time of the year. The water was in the upper 40s, and I ended up catching a lot of my fish flipping and pitching cedar trees in like 8 to 10 foot of water, which I thought was fairly shallow because this lake was pretty clear, but there was a lot of cover, a lot of cedar trees. But the only ones that I could get bit out of in 8 to 10 foot of water were the ones that were immediately next to where it dropped off into 20 or 30 foot of water. Because if you were to take a lake map and literally select like 8 to 10 foot of water, you could find a ton of cedar trees that were on flats that were in 8 to 10 foot. Those ones did not hold fish. And trust me, I fished some of them. Actually, I fished a lot of them. It was always the ones that were immediately next to those drops. So again, just remember that in the winter, bass aren't necessarily always going to be super deep when it comes to your fishing in general. The other thing to always remember in the winter is getting bites is the most important thing that you can do. And I know that that sounds a little bit weird, but there's times in the springtime, there's times in the summertime, there's times in the fall time where I will throw baits that I know probably aren't going to get a ton of bites, but they are bites that if you get bit on them, you will catch big ones. You know what I mean? Like there are times in the spring, summer, fall where I'm going to throw a big spinner bait, a big glide bait, whatever it may be, a big topwater. And I know that I'm probably like more or less missing the opportunity to get a number of bites because I'm just trying to focus on big ones. In the winter, that really kind of goes out the door for me. I do not, quote unquote, swing for the fence a lot during the winter because the name of the game is simply getting bit, like simply getting bit. And if you look at some studies out there, you know, if one of the studies I recently read said that like 43-degree water temperature was a huge change in a bass's metabolism, where they went from eating a decent amount to really not eating a whole lot. And the biggest thing to remember in the winter is that bass do not need to eat as much food in order to sustain themselves. So they don't need to always go out there and get a big meal. They don't need to get a giant shad. If they can eat a little crawfish like this every now and then in that cold water, it will sustain them. So during the coldest weather months that I like am fishing, I am a lot of times not swinging for the fence because again, I am trying to go out there and get bit. Now, my cold water might be a little bit different than your cold water, like we've discussed. You know, cold water for me is like upper 30s, low 40s. Like that water degree temperature, I'm throwing, you know, Ned rigs. I'm throwing little tiny finesse swim baits. I'm throwing blade baits. I'm throwing some very like bottom oriented baits that are pretty small. You know, cold water for you might be like 50s, and in the 50-degree range, bass will absolutely still hit really big baits. And so just again, keep that all in mind. When I'm talking about cold water, I'm talking about very, very, very cold water. And again, in those situations, I just like to get bit. That is all I'm trying to do. If I can get 5 little bites throughout the day, they can turn into some really big fish, because even those big ones do not need to eat a whole lot during this time of the year. And so don't focus, you know, don't go out there and throw a big jig, you know, across the point when you're dealing with 42-degree water. Throw a little tiny jig. Like getting bites is truly one of the most important things that you can do during this time of the year. So anyways, I really just kind of wanted to sum up the video in those 2 main points. Bass aren't always deep, and just try to get bit, because I think that those are the most important things to remember. Because again, I want you guys to all go out there and experience some fun. And I will tell you that even catching 1 or 2 fish when the water is super cold, there's just something about it that just makes you feel really, really good. So, all right, guys, hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to check out that fin fishing gear. I have it linked right here, and I will see you guys tomorrow.